Oh boy. Boy, that's Perry Como. My mother used to love him when she was watching the TV. Great singer. Well, here we go again with Christmas. It's an interesting article. Last week, Mr. Silverman, an atheist, came on a Fox News TV program with Bill O'Reilly, and they had a discussion. Holiday tree or Christmas tree? Are we hearing more of this as time goes on? O'Reilly says, Christianity is not a religion, but a philosophy. Now that was a serious mistake. He must be writing a new dictionary. He's written a book about Lincoln, another one about others, but I can't believe that he's taken common language like religion, and it's Christianity, and it's a philosophy. Yeah, you can throw in philosophy, but really, I guess he was trying to really stump the atheist. Well, he was trying to appeal, obviously, to common sense of an atheist. Is that a contradiction, oxymoron, I would say? You know, I wonder when Santa Claus is okay, although he is a secularized St. Nicholas. Now, this is an interesting story. St. Nicholas of Myra, M-Y-R-A. He was inspiration for the Christian figure of Sinterklaas, S-I-N-T-E-R-K-L-A-A-S. It's a 4th century Greek Christian bishop of Myra, now in Turkey. Good background for St. Nicholas. It won't be long before Santa Claus is felled by another leftist. And you can pretty well be sure it'll be propelled from someone in the Democratic Party. Oops. No, I didn't really want to say that. You know, they're all over the place here, I think. And they tolerate me okay. Now, we as Christians, we're outnumbering them greatly. But unfortunately, we don't seem to take the opportunity to validate our beliefs enough. They succeed because too few of us have the courage. You know, when I go into stores, I tell businesses, you know, if you don't want to validate my beliefs, then why should I come to your place? And, you know, it's just one of those things. I just won't. It's time for you, for us, to develop a backbone in what we believe. Atheists and their sympathizers, the new tone for our Christmas season, it's an oppression of the majority by the minority. Absolutely amazing, revolutionary, happening in the USA. This is a good newspaper. 1867, founded October 7th, 1867. It's a weekly newspaper, Catholic weekly newspaper. I get it weekly. Good. Hi, I'm Straight Talk, coming from the studios of RCTV in Reading, Massachusetts. Glad to be with you. It's been a while since I've had a program on Wednesday night. I've had them all kinds of the day during the week, and also day and night. And I've had a different schedule. That's the problem. So tonight you can call in on that number at the bottom, 944-8888, anytime, and only on today, which is December 12th. Unusual number of, it's the only time probably another century we'll have 12-12-12. If you want to see my programs at any time, they are being uploaded by the studio on my website, johnnystraighttalk.com. It's listed at the bottom of your screen. Well, it is a tyranny of the minority, as we've seen it happen in the last several years, and it's accelerating. So Mr. Baroni has a great phrase that he uses that I've adopted for my program. It's Mr. Baroni, he's a senior political analyst at the Washington Examiner. Government works for the irresponsible and not for the responsible. Now, we're not talking about people who are disabled, who have other kinds of limitations. In fact, today, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've doubled the number of people claiming disability. This is in the USA Today. And I'm not sure how that's happening, but certainly it doesn't seem to be appropriate. They're responsible for what we're talking about. We have more and more of those happening. Even though Mr. Romney used 47%, he included people who are a variety of different programs, the military and everything else. But we know for sure that it's increasing. It used to be about 35%. I don't have the real figure right now, but if you look at a chart of the percentage of GDP, it used to be approximately about 35%, and I think it's even lower before that. But today, granted, there are more today using those programs, and rightfully so. But we're going in the wrong direction. So you're welcome to call in. No one, not for this program anyway. So let's begin. We have our first slide here. And let's begin with, what do we mean by separation of church and state? First of all, we have the First Amendment. And the First Amendment, if we can come to the slide, please. The First Amendment. And if you want a booklet of the Constitution, Bill of Rights, and others, I have them, and you're welcome to call the studio or call me at my cell phone number, which is 781-389-6879. That's a booklet there at the bottom left. I bought about 200 of them. So I'm dedicated to promote the longest serving Constitution in the world, which is being adopted by other countries. Back to the slide here. So Congress shall make no law. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The key word is establishment of religion. So we're going to go through and discuss this with the next slide we have here. And if you want this other booklet here, which is a truth about the separation of church and state, I also have those. It's a very good, fast read. The separation of church and state. Not written in the Declaration of Independence, not in the Constitution or Bill of Rights. And I had one gentleman call from the Unitarian Church. He came on a program talking about, I'm kind of criticizing his church. We discussed that. If I could continue on with that slide, please. And we'll have it until I tell you otherwise. And he said, well, you know, there is a wall of separation between church and state. And then I said this to him, and he still couldn't believe me, but I've never heard from him again in the last 3 years. And that's about 45 shows ago. So that's one of the most misused statements that I hear over and over again. And you simply tell them it's not written anywhere. But now, where was it written? First of all, Thomas Jefferson in 1802 wrote a letter to a Baptist minister in Connecticut, and where Jefferson used the words wall of separation between church and state. This letter really was written to this Baptist minister after the Baptist minister was concerned about the fact that since most of the colonists were from the English heritage, that the Anglican Church would be established as it was in Europe, or at least in England. And he assured that Baptist minister there would be, and he used those words. That was the first incident of those words being used. Now, it was then kind of adopted once Hugo Black used it in one of his decisions. And what is the intent, the original intent, knowing that the founders were from England mostly, And they had beliefs, and they wrote on the basis of what their experience was at the time in England, in Netherlands, and other parts of the Western civilization at that time. So establishment meant something. In order to understand what that means, you really have to go back and look for the original intent. In fact, what happened when the colonists came to this country, Connecticut had its own religion, or they decided to have the Congregationalists. Then also Massachusetts started with that. And then they kind of, as the time went on, they decided not to have a specific religion. Next, in 1780, Massachusetts had a system which required every man to belong to a church. That's pretty interesting. So every man belonged to a church, but if there were any taxes levied, it wasn't for any particular church. Then we have in a statement by James Madison, who wrote the Bill of Rights. In fact, he's called the father of the Constitution, even though Thomas Jefferson was the major that is, major writer of the Constitution. Mr. Madison started that, but he also wrote clearly on his own the Bill of Rights. He issued 4 religious amendments or religious proclamations while he was president. And he said, because if religion be exempt from the authority of the society at large, still less it be subject to that of the legislative body. So he felt it was important to have religion. Another incident, Jefferson, and an issue about the state supporting a professorship of divinity from his state of Virginia. Jefferson said he supports for a scheme in which the students at the university would attend religious worship each morning as evidence of his views were not consistent with strict separation, and that was a complaint by somebody. But he said, well, I still believe that that should be done, and that is there should be some relationship with the students and being able to have their particular programs while they're in school. And so Jefferson kind of violated partly of what he originally said, but that happened. Another incident was in 1789. At that time, Madison, again, indicates he intended for the Establishment Clause to prevent the government imposing religious beliefs on individuals. So there's another freedom of expression in that case. To both the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists, the very word national was a cause for alarm because of the experience under the British Crown, as we know. Then in 1947, so we see a progression of what's happening from different states actually having unique religions, different kinds, but they were, and now we see it kind of diminishing with time. In 1947, there was a decision by Justice Hugo Black in a case where the wall of separation came in, and it was upholding the law allowing funding of transportation of students to religious schools. So even though they had that statement, they still felt it was not establishing religion by just simply paying for the transportation of students to religious schools. In another case, it was 1962, the idea of prayer in the schools. This was a famous situation with Madeleine O'Hare, where the courts voted 6-1, saying it's unconstitutional for state officials to compose an official school prayer and require its recitation in public schools, even when the prayer is non-denominational and students may excuse themselves from participation. So you see the narrowing of the definition. So even though the students were not participating, they still considered that to be an establishment of religion, which is interesting. And remember how we're getting away from the original interpretation of what the colonists had been experiencing while they were in England. And lastly, we have the case in 1971 where the Pennsylvania state policy of reimbursing the salaries of teachers of secular subjects in religious schools or the costs of secular instructional materials in religious schools violated the Establishment Clause. And I quote, "Our prior holdings do not call for total separation between church and state. Total separation is not possible in an absolute sense." So in that case here, they felt that they were okay. Judicial caveats against entanglement must recognize a line of separation, far from being a wall, is a blurred, indistinct, and variable barrier depending on all circumstances of a particular relationship. Lastly, in the year 2002, you can come to me, please. There was a three-panel judge ruling in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said that the recitation, classroom recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance in a California public school was unconstitutional even when students were not compelled to recite it due to the inclusion of the phrase "under God." One thing about the Ninth Circuit of Appeals, this is the left coast, we're certainly not the right coast for any reason, we're catching up. This is the court that's overruled by the Supreme Court more than any other court, appeals court in the United States. More decisions have been overruled by their misinterpretation as the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in misinterpretation. So here we go. Now we're down to just the word. We're not talking about religion or anything else, but just the word God makes it unconstitutional. And this is a declaration, this is the Pledge of Allegiance. So here we go. So you can see the direction that we've gone. And it's certainly, I'm not a legal authority by any means, but you don't have to understand what the original intent of that particular statement, wall of separation, is and where it has gone to and where the country was when they left England. Okay. So, my supporting three premises for this program. One, what would happen if you went to Rome, you went to especially, say, Japan, Russia, China, Muslim country, even South American countries? Do you think they care if you were offended by their traditions? We go to these places, to experience and admire what they do, but certainly would they? And certainly that isn't the case. Secondly, if the Christians are to maintain their culture, we must wake up and persuade politicians and non-practicing Christians and others to patronize businesses that affirm and support our heritage and values. Third, if we allow the secularists to keep pushing God out of our public lives, can we expect God to give us more grace and blessings? So, I've discussed the separation of church and state, and now let's go into some of the statements that we'd like to talk about. First of all, we know that different countries have different traditions, different values. We're operating on a very narrow definition of establishment of religion by the state, very narrow. And certainly, from what we discussed, there's no way you can interpret that statement, which is one I mentioned to you. I have it kind of fell on the floor, as being one which would prohibit what's happening today. It's being pushed by the atheists and others who are sympathetic to them, and we really are not doing the best we can to prevent this. So let's look at the second item. Second item is, when I see others who do this, that is, say, they don't say Merry Christmas or something referring to the holiday itself, I say, well, you know, you don't support my heritage, so why should I support your business? And I've done that a number of times. And if more of us did that, we would certainly send a message that we, the majority, deserve to be heard. We ought to let them know what they're doing, and we also can tell them we'll influence our friends and neighbors. This is the only way we can hope to really continue on with what we've had even in my generation. Businesses can do what they want to do, as we well know. But we can do also what we want to do. As far as the government goes, well, we can't seem to influence the Supreme Court in many ways. It's difficult, even though the liberals and the conservatives are split, where Mr. Kennedy, Judge Kennedy, is the swing vote at this point in time. It is really the ultimate of political correctness. Even Ben Stein, who is a Jew, talks well of Christmas. He doesn't necessarily celebrate it, but he recognizes its value as a heritage that we have in this country. We have people like Madeleine O'Hare, which I mentioned. It only took one person to do what they did, and that is to prevent prayer in the school system. Even the mention of God in the Pledge of Allegiance. These things here are disconcerting. We also have the famous ACLU, which is fully supported, backed by the Democrats. And, you know, if you think that I'm being unfair, I have here my chair here with this invisible person. I invite the left, whoever they are, whether it's Democrats, liberals, progressives, coming to this chair to talk about what I say about them. And, you know, for 3 years now, not anybody, as far as except those that I've invited personally from another town, came. I've had a few people, a couple, Carolyn Osborne, and she did very well. But she didn't want to come again because her friends were watching and she felt she was giving up the store as a liberal. She was a good old-fashioned liberal. So please come, you know. This chair is for you to give your viewpoint and not to be afraid of what your friends will talk about. Now, in the third case here, as Christians, we're supposed to bring others. This is our responsibility. Bring others to God, to evangelize. And that's what that means, evangelism. We want God to support us with grace, everybody. However, we're dismantling him in the public square. And we complain about, you know, why God has let this tragedy happen, the tsunami, 9/11, Pearl Harbor. All of these things have really been terrible disasters for humanity. So we call God when we want to, but yet, you know, it's like a salesperson. It's very difficult to get calls on customers. I know because I used to do this myself. Now I have my own company and I train others. It's very difficult because most of the people are busy. But when you do meet your customer, what is on his mind? It's not lunch, because they don't go out to lunch anymore. Literally, do not go out to lunch. They're so busy. And I've seen a transition in the last 40 years especially. What's on their mind is, what have you done lately for me? And that's the question you ask of yourself. If you haven't done anything lately to nurture a relationship with God, why should he all of a sudden listen to your faint voice where he has so many other people who are doing otherwise, who are understanding the relationship you have with your Creator? And my prayer, I say, is You are my creator. I am your humble servant. Help me to find a way you would like me to work in this world. This is the story. Billy Graham's daughter also said the same thing. She said in so many ways, and I quote, "Farther and farther out of our government," that's God, "business, marketplace, and schools." And that's what's the trend. We have had the Old Testament records of God's relationship with chosen people, the Jews. Time and time again, the relationship was rocky. They get out of sync, there'll be a calamity. So let me summarize the direction that we need to go. First of all, we have our heritage. We have our traditions, and they're disappearing, and the interpretation is getting narrower of what is allowed at all in our government. And Obama said the same thing when he challenged the Catholic Church to accept his Human Health Services program of dispensing birth control and also abortifacients or patients. And these are the day after pill, which you can abort a child or at least a fetus or an embryo. This was forced upon the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church will have to dispense these things under law if this continues. There's a lawsuit by the Catholic Church against the Obama administration. I don't recall any time in my lifetime this has happened. So here is the President of the United States, especially the President of the United States, challenging the Church's fundamental beliefs. He certainly is not very caring about the Catholic traditions. So there's another example of what's happening. So when you see a merchant or you see anybody in the street, wish them a Merry Christmas. If the person looks dismayed by your comment, then what I follow up with is, "Oh, I'm sorry, I may have offended you. What should I have said to you? You know, what religion do you belong to, or otherwise?" Have a conversation. I think it's instructive. You're being respectful of the individual. Second, the implicit message from our customers, who see you, is that, you know, this issue about the salesperson. You have to be aware of what we have for a relationship with Christ, or whatever God you have. That should be respected by those who come to this country and even those within this country. We want to put God in our lives and in the public arena, not completely eliminating him. It's sad. And lastly, you have a creator. Most people believe in a creator. About 90% of the people in the United States believe in a creator. If he is a creator, give his due, because that's where the help will come, even in the sense of psychological help. I have a booklet that came out with a nutrition magazine. The importance of having meditation or otherwise is very important. So I leave you with Buon Natale, which is in Italian, Merry Christmas, Feliz Navidad, which is in Spanish. Then we also have the German Fröhliche Weihnachten, and then we have the famous Latin, which is Felix Dies Navitatis. And I wish you the best for you and your family and the community.